Welcome to the cryptozoology show. This episode, it's lake monsters of Australia. From bunyips to killer sharks, let us explore some scary cryptids and monster fish of Australia. No, there was a couple of slides that was supposed to be in there. I wanted to talk about these sort of bizarre mermaids that was preventing this dam from being sort of built. But I'll talk about mermaids a little bit later there in that. But one of the places we were supposed to talk about in Africa there, and I wondered why I only had that one depiction of the tigerfish. And but anyways, we got him here. There was this bizarre story in Lake Tanganyika back by this human being was apparently out in the sort of in the water a little bit, and the several witnesses had saw this giant silver sort of colored like big flashy scale looking stuff roll over and sort of nail them, and they were gone, right? So here's what Goliath tigerfish looks like a little bit, and the previous one was sort of with his mouth closed and everything. So even though they don't supposedly get this big, there is these stories of even full size adults being nailed by them, right? So obviously this one's this is from this story here in the 1930s, because whatever it was Titanic size, like sort of thing. But also, there's a giant fish, sort of serpent like creature with a mouth that supposedly can swallow a boat. That might have been this same thing in the 1930s, but they saw it silver, maybe the light, who knows? Like, the descriptions are odd, eh? They're usually more serpentine and stuff, but there is sort of tigerfish there. Um, I don't know how long they've been endemic in there, or that sort of thing, but there's just another species that's available there, like these giant Nile perch. And there's been like other stuff from shark-like stuff to different things said from time to time to big snakish like sort of stuff. But so what's interesting about the place is that huge amounts of boats have oddly like been found sort of knocked over, sort of, and they don't recover the bodies. Sometimes like several hundred people sort of went down in these big crashes and boats and stuff like that, and very few recovered. So like, I mean, there's these weird sort of stuff, something's grabbing them, right? So besides the odd visit of a killer crocs and other sorts of strange sorts of things, there's certainly some possibly other terrifying beasts that are floating around there. And again, nobody knows. I mean, there could always be an unknown sort of relative of some kind of one that are similar, that even get bigger, right? Or that certain species get gigantism once in a while and become titanic size, right? So could you imagine these Goliath tigerfish would typically about like a bigger size one will have usually at least about inch long teeth on it, sort of thing. And but I've heard of accounts of like where the bite marks, if that's what they were blaming it off of a tigerfish, and the bite marks were like well over 2 inches and something in them, near 3 inches, sort of thing. So that would indicate that there's got to be some pretty ferocious sort of size ones out there, probably, right? A sort of thing like that. So I mean, absolutely terrifying. But so here you go. So definitely not a good idea to be going swimming in any African rivers or lakes for any reason, under any circumstances. Stay, inside your showers in the hotel, and don't be swimming in these rivers, because people have banished in even the tiniest little sort of streams and all kinds of stuff from even shark apparently occasionally, right? So I mean, they'll get up even small rivers and all kinds of weird things, right? So there's not only them to sort of worry about, but other sort of stuff in there. This Lake Tanganyika, besides that, like I said, has all these numerous bodies have disappeared and weird sort of things like that. Quite a few accounts of strange sort of ones of a serpent like sort of one. It's rarely seen though, and a lot of accounts actually came from just one human being. So, like I mean, but there is a lot of strange vanishings in the sort of lake of other sort of stuff that people attribute possibly to some kind of thing like this, right? But whatever the case, for some reason, somehow a lot of boat accidents happen on a lake that isn't, you know what I mean, the Atlantic Ocean here. And even though, yeah, you could blame some on crocs and different sorts of stuff, and the odd wayward shark or whatever it is that can float in, but the thing is that there seems to be more to it, and the sightings are on and off for sort of a long time here, sort of thing. So it's interesting. It's just another sort of strange cryptid out there that's feasible. But that one terrifying account of the giant silver one makes me sort of wonder again. Let's look at this dude one more time here. That is one terrifying creature. Could you imagine if one was that big, like reported in that sighting? I know every hardcore angler in the planet would love to hook into it, but I guarantee you anybody, no matter who you are, would be scared trying to handle it after. Because especially one that size, can you imagine if one was that big compared to one of these pygmy people swimming around, let's say, a smaller person, a child, right? Sort of thing like that. This would be one Titanic dude, right? It's this sort of thing, right? Like, maybe like sort of 12, 14 feet long on a sort of idea here, right? So, but these are these accounts sometimes of sort of like really large sort of a fish to serpent like thing, and sometimes they'll have strange scales on them like dragons, you know. So it makes you wonder, is it possible that a couple of ones have super gross to them and they're older sort of fish, and they'll keep the legend going for a while, and then a new one comes along once a blue moon, right? But whatever the case, absolutely one of the most terrifying fish in the planet, man. Absolutely, sort of thing like that. But anyways, just another sort of interesting, sort of a bizarre cryptid. Oh, Dar was perturbed there. We got a update here. This is interesting. Jean-Guy's informant was able to use the psychic to read the minds of these true glow clones that are still floating around, that were thought to have caused a brain face sucking creature in the Mizzen Lava River there to go on a munchies patrolling sprees, killing sprees, sort of, right in the 90s. There was piles of people with their faces, I'd mentioned the other show, with their blood drained out and all this kinds of stuff like that. So the psychic was able to figure out what this true glow clone was that these aliens are making and popping all over seemingly the world. It's after reading the sort of these sort of clones' minds here, it kept repeating the same things: le pot, le halal poutine, le convert, le bat, le 50, le invest in masque, le law, and worship la moi. So there you have it. So that's what these clones. So they program them to give the basics, I guess, to sort of convert as much as possible out to become a true Glowian. So, but anyways, that sort of a Mazulava river monster there. They're concerned that Jean-Guy is very concerned that if one of these True Glow clones, or if True Glow was in the back of the Parliament's smoking a cracker by down by the river, and the Ottawa River monster comes by and the same thing happens, well, then it may mutate him too and get on a munchie spree and start, attacking everybody's face and standing along the sort of river there, trying to suck you from blood. So not a good idea there. So anyways, keep these true glow clones completely away from water sides. They may have been responsible for those numerous attacks in the 90s. But anyways, one of the stranger cryptids in the planet, definitely sort of out there, is that Mizzen Lava River beast. They're absolutely bizarre. So whatever it was, I suspect that's obviously something killed these people, and it certainly couldn't have been crabs. But I mean, it could have been a lot of things, right? Like I mean, so it's hard to know. But I mean, and none of them will stay around long enough. But I mean, some of the descriptions did give it this sort of fork-like, tongue-like thing that comes out and sort of sucks right on you and starts sucking the stuff. It's so pretty out there, terrifying sort of a cryptid anyways. But that was the update on the sort of African ones there. And I wanted to talk about the mermaids, but I'll talk about them later. I'll mention a little bit of the African ones there too, because there was a few interesting sort of ones. But next year we'll probably go on about the most famous of all the cryptids of Australia, and that would be the sort of the bunyip, reported in many rivers, the swamps and lakes of Australia, especially by the billabongs. This bizarre cryptid has a long history, blamed on missing people to deaths. In early times, a lot of times, the earlier sort of ones, they said it seems that what has occurred here is, and I'll explain this in my opinion at least anyways, that there actually really was seemingly some kind of early bunyip-like sort of a thing, okay, but also seals got involved with this sort of thing, and a couple other sort of strange things, all mixing it together. But the original sort of creature seems to be quite different sort of than the further accounts later on sort of thing like that. Like in early times it was like Lake George and Lake Bathurst. There was numerous early accounts and that. Here this young lady goes for a nudie dip out in the small local sort of a river there, and sadly, the old bunyip is sort of waiting for a girl like this, and sort of vanished with her surfboard, sort of in this sort of a river, and that was one of the suspects that might have got her, compared to also a sea monster, to a crocodile, shark, and many other suspects, right? But this is sort of basically in the early sort of descriptions, the creatures sort of look very different than in the later sort of accounts and stuff like that. But it's passed on by Aborigines, and they've had them in early times. It seems the creature had a lot of strange sort of things to it, right? So, like, I mean, it was very different than the ones later you get. And so it seems like about 3 different kinds of creatures oddly here are mixed up into this one bunyip-like sort of phenomena, right? So, like, it's been reported sealed to fish. Like, one better description in 1845 newspaper said it had a face like an emu with a long beak, ridge like an alligator on back, and body like a crocodile. Also said the creature hugs you to death like Barney. So, I love you, you love me. so that's a bit strange, but certainly interesting sort of bizarre sort of accounts to it. But that's why in this one here, you can see it adds sort of more like a sort of a brutish like beak, and strange sort of fish-like sort of things to it and things like that. But the accounts get sort of stranger. It roughly means in their language like evil spirit or like a demon monster sort of idea, sort of thing like that. Even supposed bodies have been examined that were thought to be bunyips. One later was blamed on a deformed cow to a horse, but it was originally found in 1847. Interestingly, how science cannot tell a difference between a horse and a cow. And I'm going to talk about this later, that there is a gigantic amount of sort of ridiculous sort of each time where it is impossible, the explanation they're given from UFOs to this and that. And I'm completely convinced in government, like sort of any sort of wacky thing that has anything to do with this sort of stuff, unless they got, Sasquatch shoved right up the rectum they will refuse to sort of, whatever that they get, they're going to tell you it was something else. And this seems to be like a lot of cases here where it's just like, I mean, how do you each time in all these accounts, like there's all kinds of them, and same with the shark attacks I talk about later, how everybody believes they're bull sharks, but if you actually analyze the sightings and the attacks and stuff, these are just presumptions made by anybody. Quite often the people that even mentioned originally, they said no, the person recognized it and it seemed to be like a mako or a tiger shark, or by the kind of bite radius, but then later then they get in it, they switched it to a bull shark. And so people have seen this preach bull shark, bull shark, bull shark. They're not actually questioning who made the authority to prove that it was a bull shark. You'd have to analyze each sort of carcass of a person, if anything was left, right? Sort of thing, and the bite mark ratios and things like that. So what was happening is each time when somebody was attacked in sort of a river and things like that, it's a bull shark, right? Because that's they can't hide that one that they come up in rivers because it's just too often, right? But the case is that in a lot of sort of accounts, people are describing a great white or as sort of anything from all kinds of bizarre sorts of sharks that you could possibly imagine, many different sorts of species, right? In many accounts all across the world, but especially in Australia. But we'll talk about that more after. But it seems that they just constantly sort of do this. And I find it extremely hard to believe that any scientist that would have sort of a degree, like they're not going to give this to a geologist to look at it. They would hand it to a person that's sort of, you know what I mean, an animal, mammal expert or somebody more qualified to sort of look at what it possibly could be, right? And you're telling me that half the time they give you these crazy explanations, it's a deformed cow or horse, like you don't even know which of the two it is. Yet you're the great scientist that's supposed to, you know what I mean, know all this sort of thing. You can see there seems to be some kind of ridiculous sort of stuff to that. So, you know, you get the same thing with Sasquatch and all kinds of stuff, right? So it makes you wonder what's really going on there. Do governments to stop calls all the time? And to anything like that, just sort of anything in this relegated world is then relegated to it must have been a beaver every time or a moose or whatever it is. That's the explanation because they don't want people paranoid that there's a great white shark 100 miles up the river eating people, right? Or these kinds of things, right? But you know, there was that, but many other accounts are more sealed like, and some are more deprotodon like, which is I love the most here in descriptions. Although modern sightings have occurred, the original creature seems to have not been seen for at least 100 years or more, of like what you can call these weird ones, of where was the more fish like what they said with the pointed beaks and the weird sorts of weird other ones, right? There was quite a few seal like ones mixed in amongst them, which definitely that's some of the accounts and stuff like that. But a side note though is possibly that there was some living diprotodons still floating around. There's still actually the odd story from time to time, but there was one in the 1970s that was floating around, but you know, I haven't heard of anyone in recent times and stuff like that. But as a for instance here, there was an early account of this gold miners in the stream, streams to mountain waters, that would report these giant bunny rabbits that were 10 to 15 feet long and 8 feet high that could leap 20-foot plus feet. So there was this one account, a giant bunny rabbit in 1870s leaped at a gold panner in a region of the Blue Mountains. The monster bunny hissed at him with shining ferocious teeth a foot long. It then leaped over his head 25 feet at least, bolting off into the forest. So there's a depiction of it, can you imagine? So, but I mean, absolutely, that's a pretty wild one there. So that'd be something to see gold panning. I did some gold panning and actually filled up a couple of vials full of sort of gold nuggets, a little gold nuggets and flakes, and found even a ruby, a garnets, a black Alaskan diamonds, and all kinds of stuff. And this was only at about 8 or 10 hours of gold panning in many of the streams that were actually along the transcontinental highway, and I actually found over a half an ounce of weight in gold. It's like, I mean, a person actually, if you wanted to sort of goof around there, like if you were really into just camping and doing Bigfoot like stuff, you probably could sort of wreak out a small living just leaping around doing that sort of like that, because I was astonished that you would think these beds that are right beside highways and stuff would be like empty, right? But they're not. There's still stuff in them. At least there was, anyways, when I last went, right? but just an interesting side note. But I love this story here with this giant bunny rabbit leaping out, and you'd get these ones from, especially the 1800s and stuff like that, when before they started really taking it over, sort of a thing like that. But extremely interesting. It's sort of I like the idea of this monster sort of giant bunny rabbit like sort of thing, right? Yeah, but very, very cool. But other ones there reported to be seal-like, often in reports to walrus, including a few that recognize them as such. So even one guy actually said that he was sure it was some kind of a walrus. One guy had seen it in the 40s. As mentioned, worldwide, seals randomly swim up rivers, sometimes thousands of miles from the sea, and for sure some accounts of bunyips were seals. But the original creature is blamed on a lot of deaths, and yeah, elephant seals would even sort of attack a person if you sort of came around their, young and all this sort of stuff, or sort of got in their way too much. They might charge at you and things like that. But basically, they're certainly not interested in eating you anyways, but they certainly could cause you some harm, right? Sort of thing like that. But it's not likely that that's what occurred and that sort of thing, and the descriptions are strange. Like in the earlier accounts, it had a sort of like crocodile longer sort of tail and sort of weird sort of fishy like, and sort of and a long beak. That's not very sort of walrus like, but I suppose like elephant seals have a longer sort of front sort of thing up to them, and they can get quite huge. There was old records of some like 18, 20 feet long reported and stuff like that, but certainly for sure at least like 14, 15 feet they can get, sort of thing like that. So I mean that's pretty huge, right? Like I mean that's, yeah, as I mentioned the book there about the White River Monster, and that sort of like ones like that for sure that's what it was an elephant seal. And elephant seals, sort of any of these is possible, dugongs, different ones, right? Like any of these kinds of sorts. And the further up sort of the coast, right, sort of these things would be, the less the natives would sort of realize that, right? Because they're not living by the ocean and stuff like that, so they may never run across them rarely, right? So when seeing them, it might have scared them and things like that. So for sure, and what I suspect is that these sort of bunyip-like sort of things were all in many more sorts of marshes and weird stuff in the earliest times. It could be that, like in some of the accounts I go on next about another sort of cryptid coming up, that the thing is that it could be that this creature sort of was unusual at the beginning, where it definitely seemed to attack humans and sort of had a bit more of a vicious like thing and a more plesiosaur like head and sort of weird stuff like that. So what I suspect is that when this creature started dying off, because a lot of these sort of in early times, even some of these legs dried out and all kinds of weird sorts of stuff like that, where they were less or marshes and things like that, and human encroachment, early explorers and all this kinds of stuff, it's feasible that they might have went extinct for that reason or some other reason, right? And that sort of thing. And then after that, then what people, when they'd see a seal up there, they knew of these stories of this bunyip from the past, and they relegated it to the bunyip. So then you get piles of sightings of still bunyips for ages to come, but they're much more of this seal walrus like, right? So I mean, you can see like sort of how these could sort of cross over, right? So, but very interesting. And it was like certainly another fascinating sort of creepy cryptid out there that sadly doesn't seem to be no more there, sort of thing like that. But I mean, some vanishings have still occurred from time to time in weird areas, and that's always been like anytime it's been in a river or strange stuff like that. Some people will sort of give it, say that it could be a bunyip, or things like that. So, I mean, the legend still persists, right? But, I mean, even though supposedly there's some modern accounts, nobody really describes these things very well. And typically, a lot of them seem to be seal-like, walrus, dugong-ish, any kind of thing like that, manatee-ish. Yeah, any of that sort of range of family sort of thing, right? They all look sort of similar to that sort of way. Like, I mean, especially from a distance and things like that. People, if they're not sort of Merlin Perkins or something. Right? Like, I mean, or what's his name there? Mr. Jungle there from the zoo there. He always used to go on Johnny Carson and stuff like people like like that, right? Like, I mean, they're quite familiar with the animals, right? But I mean, so not average. A lot of average people are. So especially, if they've never seen one in their region like that, and they don't have typical TV 24 hours a day and all that kind of stuff, right? So, it's certainly understandable why that they might have mistaken seals and mixed them in, and why they would think that. Like, I mean, even I can see myself, if I've never seen, I don't know, the sort of Charleston Lake monster, and, I was told that he's sort of this big creepy monster, and he's black or something. Now I see a big dark seal come up to sort of into the lake, and he's flopping around. If I didn't know what a seal, like if I lived in that region, we never saw one. I would just automatically think that could be the Charleston Lake monster, because that's what they said. He was big and black, and right, like, so it's kind of like that. Like, I could see how these things could continue over the sort of ages, right, and sort of the story to continue on, sort of. So it's sad. It may be that whatever this creature was doesn't exist, because I mean, no reliable accounts, but in modern sort of times here, where it's continuing on with the tradition, they seem to be all more seal-like or other sorts of things, right? But just another fascinating sort of one that may be on the brink of extinction or extinct, or you know what I mean. It was a mix-up of several sort of creatures there, right? The Hawkesbury River monster, here a typical sighting of what people see chasing another cryptid, the Murray cod, also said to inhabit it. Right? So this is an interesting thing here. This Hawkesbury River, besides the thousand, this beast has thousands of another. This beast has thousands of years history with early Aborigines showing them on cave walls. To modern reports today, this river is 120 kilometers long and goes into the Tasman Sea. Here, as I was saying, there are giant fish being sort of chased here. These big Murray cod, he's being chased away, right, in the river by this sort of sea monster sort of thing. And it's in this sort of case, it's interesting. Pretty well, all the accounts are very plesiosaur-like, except for some odd sort of big eel sort of ones, too, mixed in with them. But apparently there's been like at least like several hundred sort of recorded sightings of this thing over the ages from different sort of investigators and different things like that. So it seems to be somewhat sporadic sometimes and things like that. But there's also accounts of giant eels in there. Modern accounts still persist, described 10 to 24 meters long. In 2000, a couple saw the creature by a jetty with a snake-like head and long neck, on the Hawkesbury River. So the beast has a much longer history than Ness in some ways. Here, a depiction of the Yara was said to live in early times in the swamps, is similar to what the descriptions of it is. Interestingly, they said the swamps dried up and they died off in early times. The natives that depicted this, or the early sort of missionary explorer, like a guy in early times, talking to them there, had never heard of a plesiosaur, but that's what they drew the depictions of them and stuff like that, right? So very interesting. Another similar creature, the Culta, was said to have long neck and snake head and huge midsection body that ate fruits, with 4 big legs and a long tail. Same thing, natives said they died out once the swamps dried up. Now, in that case, they actually can you imagine, this one here, he eats fruits again, right? And he's got this long neck with and this thing like this long tail, and these big body, and with big 4 legs. He sounds again like another one of our sauropod dinosaur buddies from over on the African continent, right? And also the ones depicted in South America. So is it feasible that some of these survived in a few different locations, different ones that were similar to it, but once, because of the climate, it dried out in Africa, even though it dries there a lot, in those areas of that Congo, it hasn't changed, they claim, for zillions of years, right? So even if you want to believe the zillions of years theory, this place hasn't changed since ancient, 10 zillion years. So one way or the other, who's ever right, it wouldn't matter. It's feasible that the creatures in an environment like that, all the rivers and lakes didn't all dry up, right? Whilst within these locations it did, right? So absolutely interesting. But another side cryptid here that isn't accepted in there is the Murray cod. Even though this is a known species, the largest known freshwater typical one besides big sharks that come in it. But these dudes look like a giant largemouth bass kind of idea, thing. And some monsters were said to get over 6 feet and 250 pounds, at least in stories of them even attacking small humans and stuff. So pretty terrifying here. As you can see, this young lady here is going for a bit of a swim there, and old Jaws is coming up, right? So not good. But besides regular cryptids, these also rumors of giant Murray cod in a relic population that live in the river. So it's not accepted, but there's a lot of sightings. So one witnessed a giant one that swallowed a duck near his canoe in 2000. Numerous accounts of them attacking ducks, to the odd ones attacking somebody's swimming pooch, have occurred across their range. Larger ones are rare now due to overfishing, guys. So that's the main reason, like in a lot of places, right? Thing like that. But here another interesting big fish that you can chase down there, the barramundi. I've always wanted to catch one of these things too. This Murray cod is even more cooler, but the barramundi is right up there. He's like a big macho largemouth bass, very similar in a lot of ways. Their mouth's a bit smaller. They they're in the middle between like a smallmouth, largemouth, like their shape and everything else, but very similar in a lot of ways, right? Like you could tell this, what I was saying, worldwide, that they must have been saltwater species that got trapped, just like some sea monsters have and other things. And when the all this flood disappeared and all these things, that they started all adapting, and they adapted similar, but due to climate and the other food that might have been stuck in there and many other variants, can make the largemouth bass instead of this guy or this one. Like, it's that sort of thing, right? So, but anyway, so, but absolutely, some of them were like absolutely huge. There was older records of some reaching these barramundi 2 meters and over 150 pounds, but modern accounts is much less typically. I remember there was one listed back a few years ago. Somebody caught one, what was it, near 100 pounds or something like that, a sort of thing like that. So quite the monsters though. But they're very similar in a lot of sort of ways here. And here you can see this spectacular beast here. This Murray cod, he's going to come up and nail a big spinnerbait there, right? And it's interesting too. They have a lot of the same sort of habits and everything like that. Both of these guys love like sunken timber, rock ledges, holes in rivers, and other structure-like areas, right? Just like this monster winner of a bass tournament, slightly over 7 pounds, brought in. Sort of the same thing certainly was around a big heavy piece of sort of timber, right? So, but that's the sort of thing. Is it's interesting how even in other sort of places worldwide they adapt the same kinds of sorts of things, and a lot of them do look similar, where you can sort of like, even though they'll give them different family names and all that kind of stuff, you can see the similarities in a lot of ways, right? They've adapted similar and certain things like that, but just the looks are slightly different. But even more terrifying than sort of these sort of fish, which I've never heard of a barramundi eating a human, sort of thing. But I have heard of attacks of these giant mothers there doing it in the past. Of sort of some pretty huge ones out there have tried to sort of nail the odd person and stuff like that. But the barramundi on typical are a little bit smaller than those Murray cod. So, but quite the beast. Anyways, certainly one of my wish lists. I love it. But again, every time when you're fishing in these places, the idea, we'll cover them soon, about killer crocs and all kinds of other stuff, certainly gives you the creeps when you're walking around in any of these sorts of places. So when you're a Canadian guy, you know what I mean, these kinds of things are a bit more sort of scary to the old palate. But nevertheless, I would really love to hook both of these sorts of species. It'd certainly be cool. but here is terrifying. Killer sharks. No rivers worldwide have as many listings of sharks in them than Australia. Early records to today list a host of rivers with shark attacks and sightings. Although mostly bull sharks, great whites to tigers have been reported up rivers of Australia, along with numerous other species. Since the earliest settlers came to Australia, shark attacks in rivers and even creeks and all kinds of stuff have occurred from killer sharks, and sometimes far up fresh water. In fact, there was a famous kayak race. What was the name of it? Somehow the river got deleted, but it's a famous river on the sort of, and this is way up the river. It's like fresh water there, and sort of, and they have this kayak club there. And they had this sort of world champion like race stuff going on or whatever, and this dude's going along with the other competitors, and this giant shark leaped right out, and sort of that was it, El Gondo, right? Sort of thing like that. So, I mean, absolutely terrifying. And what I was talking about before is that there's this fascinating thing where a lot of times they never find these bodies, and I don't see how these many people each time is a shark expert, and each time they knew it was a bull shark. So this is where this gets from is that each time when they were asked by the scientists, 90% of the time they never even evaluated any sort of thing because there was no body part to evaluate. And So what they would do is immediately just not, they're not going to conclude it was a great white because they don't know that. So they just say the bull shark because that was accepted and it's easy to write down. Let's, yeah, that sounds good. It must have been a bull shark. But I mean, there really is no actual proof of a lot of these things. If you look at most of the accounts, they were never, the bodies weren't examined, and a lot of times when they were, or witnesses said that they actually said it was a tiger shark or a great white or a lemon shark or different sorts of ones, right? And the thing is that not every time it's bull sharks that has done this. And some of these attacks where the boat's like fairly huge and it's the half bitten in half sort of and sunk down the bottom of the sort of, it sounds a bit big for even bull sharks and sorts of things like that. And there is these cases over the ages, right? So this is the thing, and a lot of people have disappeared and vanished in rivers that they blamed on crocs or other stuff, but it's not the case. Even bull sharks and all kinds of other ones are traversing in many, many sorts of bodies of water up these things, and it's not as uncommon as what people think at all. Here's a small list of shark attacks in rivers in Australia. In 1837, Macleay River, bather killed. Manning River, another bather was killed. Their legs were severed right off. Parramatta River victim died swimming in 1883. 1903, William Price swimming got killed by shark in the Georges River. Lane Cove River swimming, 1912. Bellinger River, 1932, victim vanished, thought to be a large shark. Maria River, witness said was a great white. The person died, severed legs in 1947. Attack was 12 miles up the river. So it's a great white and he's 12 miles up a river. How do you know he doesn't swim 20 miles up a river, right? Like on this sort of thing, right? So Swan River, several attacks since early 1900s. Although they give answers each time as bull sharks, sometimes witnesses, like I said, familiar describe species from lemon shark to even tiger shark. There's a video of a guy with a tiger shark way up a river. And I mean, this is a completely freshwater sort of location. There is, and even sort of the original deaths that was in the Matawan Creek and some of these other sorts of ones like that. They were blamed. It was blamed on a sort of a great white, right? But it was fairly up a creek, and these sorts of things like that. So there's been all kinds of cases, and like I said, it's very rare that they actually get a body back or a part. And so when the people say, "Oh yeah, it was a big shark," well, what did he look like? It was big and gray. Yeah, like so. Unless a person's like Jacques Cousteau or somebody, a lot of people, you know what I mean, they're not going to know exactly what species it was. Way more would probably recognize a great white by the huge size and the gray and all this sorts of the typical things that you'll see on it, right? Of that sort of thing. Like they're a bit more distinct looking, right? But the thing is that a lot of other species could be sort of mixed in here, that other ones that get up in these things. And so it's not only bull sharks, and I just suspect that a lot of these blame deaths on bull sharks that people just accept as face value, I think is just burying under the table, because there is no proof what they're saying. If you look at these records and stuff like that, I mean, a lot of bodies weren't found, right? And you're going by sort of that people just saw a giant roiling in the water. How does that now make it a bull shark? You see what I mean? This is just, that's what they said every time. So people have always, so when you're looking through the information each time, you always say, "Oh yeah, it was killed by a bull shark, a bull shark, a bull shark." But who stated that, and where did they get this information to prove that? Right? So unless you could see the bite mark radiuses on them, and there was quite a few where they even disagreed with them. There were some accounts where people had said that no, it looked like some kind of sort of nurse shark or different weird ones, right? Once a blue moon, odd ones thing. And the bite marks were very different than what a bull shark would have on it, yet fully ignored, and they still put in bull shark, right? So there's even accounts like this. I highly suspect that this has occurred like quite frequently, like it does with a lot of other things. If you don't have an explanation, stick with one that works, right? Sort of thing like that. So, yeah, that there was another case that absolutely terrified. This lady, get a load of this. This lady goes down by this river, sort of. She goes down by this river and sort of. I think it was around Brisbane, and there's stairs that actually goes by the water's edge, and it's just a small river. So she goes down to it. She's sitting there. These friggin' two, and again, this is a presumption. Nobody found this lady, know anything, and I doubt that the people, all they heard and sort of saw a scream and saw kind of these two big sharks leap out of the water and sort of grab her, and they heard her screaming. See, now people will believe me because she was telling other people before that she saw sharks around there. So the lady actually was grabbed by two of them at the same time. But again, who states that it's a bull shark? You get it in the story, it's a bull shark, but the only reason you're getting that is obviously the people are far off distance and all they see is this big blur or something grab and nail it, unless this person's really familiar with sharks, which most people aren't, that sort of thing. It's hard to believe that each time that these people are an expert and know what a bull shark looks like compared to a hammerhead, to a great white, or a Carcardin megalodon, or any of the other ones, right? Like, so, I mean, these things I think have been used every time, that no matter where the shark attack is, you know what I mean, if they, unless they have the body and really some bizarre evidence would make them look stupid if they tried to say it was a bull shark, like something really weird about it, they'll just sort of use this because it's acceptable, right? And it doesn't cause any controversy. They don't want 10,000 calls. Oh my goodness, there's a great white shark, swimming in Lake Ontario and he's eating everybody and this kind of stuff, right? So, I mean, this is the thing, guys. So, but people need to sort of, it's absolutely fascinating, but I mean, rivers from New York to Australia to New Zealand to any kind of country you could possibly think of, people have been probably eaten by sharks at least the odd time. So, like I said, it depends on the region and stuff. In Australia, it's extremely common, and I mean, rivers that are really remote, far, far up. I told you about that story about this sort of lake that's like 1,500 miles inland in this desert, and these sharks actually swam from the ocean in an underground subterranean river and made it in a tiny little pond that's not even like not even 1/10 the size of like Dow's Lake sort of idea. Like if you're familiar with that sort of lake, or like it's extremely small, like extremely, like it's just a pond, right? Sort of thing like that. And yet there was a bunch of them, wasn't one, a bunch of them. Now in that case they were bull sharks, but the thing is that they've been noted and caught and even seen way up far up rivers, and all kinds of species, including skates and rays and other weird sorts of stuff, right? Even sawfish and different weird other ones, right? So it's not only them, like pretty well like any sort of saltwater creature, including even octopuses. There's a film of an octopus in the somewhere in Ohio, and it's swimming in an actual river. And it's 100% an octopus. You can see it's coming up and going around, and the thing actually crawls over filthy garbage and everything else. Wildest thing you ever seen, and he's pretty huge, good size too. So he's too hard to tell what species he is because he can sort of camouflage himself well, and he looks like he's full of mutant slime from the filthy river and everything else. But there's another one like that. I forget where that one was. There was another one that was, I don't know if it was in Florida or some other weird place. There's another one similar like that in some filthy sort of canal-like river or something like our Rideau Canal here. sort of thing, and the same thing, some kind of squid octopus like thing. You can clearly see its tentacles going along. You can't identify which it is that well. It almost looks more squid-like in some ways, but anyways, like I've collected stories over the ages of them being found in lakes and sort of dams and stuff like that. So even these dudes can do this apparently, right? So it seems that almost any saltwater creature can at least stay a fair amount of time in a freshwater sort of environment, and long enough to certainly make some sightings or the odd shark attack or different like things, right? Here's stories of giant eels exist in Australia. This is the best evidence I've ever seen, except for a couple of those giant eel-like monster films that I showed you. But of one where you can't clearly dispute this whatsoever. It clearly is a giant eel, and I mean, this is a monster. A monster. It's the biggest one by far. I've been looking for proof like this for ages. You can find this on YouTube. It looks to be a longfin eel. Its face is a bit weird, but it's hard to tell. It's dark and sort of thing like that. But one way or the other, even if it was a shortfin species, it wouldn't matter. It's still a giant Angola here. Both of them can get sort of big, right? But the longfins typically usually get bigger. So. But the thing is that this is amazing. These guys got this thing filmed. It's going around in bends. It goes around more in bends. Then they keep filming it, and it keeps going way down more in bends. I think I'm being on the conservative side. I cannot believe this thing is the shortest I could ever believe in the universe. If they really did a lot of trick photography and was messing around a little bit, even at that would be like 8 feet sort of thing. Like it's too huge. You can constantly see bends in it going, and it goes way down, and you don't even see all the way to the ends of its tail. Most astonishing size. At least this is, I would say, about half the size of the sort of, now where I'm starting to get to the lake monster like sort of size here, right? And that sort of thing. And here you actually have a real one where this thing's still alive. A bunch of people were actually mad at the people saying that they thought that they stabbed it, but they claimed they didn't. It was just roughened up. Maybe that's why it was in the shallow water. Maybe some creature attacked it or some sort. But I mean, it is extraordinarily sized giant eel, a monster. An absolute monster, and I'm very happy with this sort of, that these guys found this sort of thing, because it just adds to sort of the list here of another sort of tale of these giant sort of eel monsters, right? But this was in a small stream, so again, like, I mean, you know, these weird vanishing in rivers the odd time in a small stream, the person's waiting, all of a sudden some big dark shadow comes and poof, they're gone. And these weird stuff, and never no explanation. They think it's a snake, it could be this or that, right? Some of these things may be actually possible, that there is, like, since this dude exists here, and this is like pretty sort of, if you see this, you will be astonished by the size of this eel. Oh, that was in, I was talking about that giant, the biggest one that I ever seen dead. I mean, this thing was atrocious, but what I was trying to explain is the ruler was like 60 inches, right? And I was figuring that at least it was about a foot and a half more sort of in that foot and a half, in that range past it, but the creature was at a bend, and it was almost, it wasn't like full horseshoeish, but it had a bit of a good bend to it, so you would have to add bare minimum here, like another sort of foot on it sort of idea, right? So that's where I come in this range of 7.5 to maximum 8 feet sort of long, but sort of in this sort of range, but no less than 7. So like, it was titanic, man. I mean, the girth on this thing was quite huge, right? So, but I mean, that's the biggest that I've ever sort of ran across. So even myself, I've seen one that's quite a bit bigger than sort of even the photographs are known in the North American sort of market and sort of thing like that. But we were really anchored in this night fishing for sturgeon and catfish and all these kinds of stuff, and couldn't get it loose. And this thing got dragged down underneath these sort of there's this dam below, and sort of there's these side channels, and this thing kind of got swept down there somewhere, right? But it was absolutely fascinating. But I mean, He even looks like Punky Brewster compared to this thing. I've never seen an eel this big. I mean, this is really impressive, extraordinarily. Like, it could even be much longer than that. It's very hard to tell because these guys sadly don't sort of, there's no, I haven't froze every frame, and I'm going to try and do that, and I'll give you an update if I can find sort of to give some kind of scaling a little bit better, possibly, because it's too bad the thing has huge bends and loops in it, but it's so atrociously still huge that that even makes me more think that I'm being very conservative here. So, but anyways, whatever the case, I guarantee it isn't some 5 foot eel. This is like the titan of all monsters that I've ever seen in a freshwater river. So, actual one of the more sort of better proofs I've been able to sort of see, besides that film in Yugoslavia and one in Michigan and a few other ones out there, were even bigger than this dude. But this thing here is huge. And I mean, it gives you the idea that he certainly couldn't be like, what would be the odds that they got the biggest one ever on Earth that ever was there? Like, I mean, that's not feasible at all, right? So then the only feasibility here is that, again, you get these tales for centuries and centuries of these giant eels. There's another sort of actual video proof now of one sort of this pretty, like, at least getting in the range of these stories where sort of like even like you get Crescent Lake there where these 10-foot monster eels and stuff like that, and here's sort of one right here, right? Sort of like he's got to be seriously in this sort of range. But anyways, you'll be amazingly impressed. I've never, he's astonishing, absolutely. So he makes me happy that he's just another one to sort of add to the list of certainly you know, a very interesting sort of a phenomena here where finally, because so many people are out in the waters with these cameras now and stuff, some of these accounts that once a blue moon happened are actually now coming to light where people are getting them on film, whilst in the past the odds of you having the camera or the movie camera was extremely slim because it's hard enough to see the creature, so it's only a 1 in a zillion shot anyways. And now you have to, in old days when almost nobody carried a camera with them, have one too, like, and be ready for the snapshot and everything. You can see how it most of the time didn't occur, and that's why, right? But sort of thing. So, but absolutely fascinating. You got to check that out. One of the most sort of the best evidence I've yet seen to date of a sort of like I showed you a picture of that. Like, this dude looks twice to 3 times the size of the one that is with that guy that I showed you in a previous show, where it looks like a real monster, right? Sort of thing like that. So, but this one is like dwarfs that sort of thing. So, he was a monster anyway. So, I'm congratulations to those young fellows that got that on the beach. Great stuff. So, besides killer sharks and giant eels, many river systems of lake have visitors or residents of giant crocs in them waiting for their next meal. Some huge ones are captured far up rivers. A more recent one in the Catherine River was near 5 meters long. In the Alligator River, a 15-foot crocodile jumped in the boat on 4 fishermen in their boat, and the thing actually bit into the seat, tried to bite the guy, and the guy sort of just barely got nicked on the side, and it bit into the seat instead, and somehow they managed to get this crazy thing sort of flipped out of there, and he sort of leaped back into the drink, right? But these guys just barely made it with their life, sort of stuff like that. There was this model she was wearing. It was in a tiny little river with this. It's so narrow. I mean, like you could swim across. It's got a little tiny waterfalls. These people, her and her girlfriend, they wanted to do a little fun swimming out in the thing, and they were get a load of this. So this is a reason. Don't, when you're watching Crocodile Dundee films, don't get the idea to become an explorer and swim around with crocodiles, because this is what happened to her. She got influenced by Crocodile Dundee. She wanted the Crocodile Dundee experience. She went over. She ignored their warnings. Her and her girlfriend went out there. A giant sort of croc came out. They were sort of pushed it, sort of tried to push it away. One girl shot her shoe at the monster and sort of clonked him on the head, and sort of then it sort of went and did something, and the girl panicked. This model that was inspired by Crocodile Dundee, so she decided to leap in thinking she could probably escape, and she leaps it back into the water, and she started making a few battles, and her poor girlfriend there watched her sort of inhaled, and all she could see is her face and her arms sort of saying goodbye, sort of thing like that, as she was sucked into the depths, right? So here's old Gruesome there, and he's waiting, so really stay away from these rivers in Australia. Don't be foolish. Even the most, you would never believe it could be the most tranquil place way up a river for massive miles here, and tiny, looks like a little trout stream to you, sort of thing like that. But it could have a monster laying in one of these pools and stuff like that. Below waterfalls, they like hanging out in these kinds of things, right? So bends and river banks and all kinds of weird things like that. Places they can sun themselves, these sorts of things, right? And or hide in camouflage and leap out at you, right? So really, people are way too sort of like, so besides killer crocodiles and sharks and all kinds of other, you got a lot of stuff going on here. It's probably not a good idea to be jumping around as sort of in there, right? So just the thought, right? So absolutely a scary sort of terrifying sort of thing. But that's one of the things when you're sort of, you got to watch out, man. Even in the smallest sort of locations, right? So your next snorkeling visit in one of these little streams, it could be nana doo doo, not do 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 do. Right? So, just like old Gruesome here, right? And some of these crocodiles were known to have eaten like dozens of people and all kinds of stuff, right? And some they've never been able to catch for ages, right? And they killed all kinds of them and things like that. So absolutely terrifying. So just don't think that you're safe walking around in these kinds of stuff, because it's certainly not. Right? They can be, and remember, it's a four-legged sort of creature here, right? Can you walk down to the store? Now, I'm not talking about anybody handicapped or anything, but I'm just saying in the general sense, right? A typical human being, you can walk to the sort of a store and things like that. Well, obviously the same thing, a creature, you know what I mean? Like, he can sort of get up. I showed you in another one there, a giant sort of alligator monster that, this guy's titanic. He's absolutely terrifying. He looks like the Lochness monster, right? And when you see people standing near him, they look like little toothpicks to him, compared to him, right? And this dude walks all the time, all down the streets, and does all kinds of crazy stuff, and it doesn't seem to be too aggressive towards humans. But these crazy tourists will stand right there, and they're only a few feet from them, and they're taking pictures, and this guy could inhale any of them with just burping, sort of, right? Right, just like in 1 second, and that'd be the end of it, right? Sort of thing like that. So the same thing applies in these sort of waters like that. Even in any one of them can visit another marsh or stream down this sort of stuff. So even if they look tranquil, they may harbor a pretty deadly threat. So just keep those things in mind, besides all the killer kinds of snakes there and every other wacko sorts of stuff. You got the Behringer, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex monster leaping around, and yowies and sort of thylases, and you got Queensland tiger cats and a whole host of other wild sort of cryptids out there, and different sort of ones from Megalania crispa through just all kinds of stuff. I could have included him in there too, sort of like because he's got a lot of fascinating evidence and even great footprints and all kinds of stuff. And very credible people that are scientists in other fields have even spotted the thing, right? So, and there was this farmer in the 70s that these giant footprints were found on his property. I mean, these things were astonishing. It's terrifying, right? So, if you think the Komodo dragon is the king, he's not. There is some on some other islands that I sort of collected stories from not only Australia but other sort of ones in Asia and different ones like that of monsters that make these Komodo dragons look like minnows, right? Sort of things like that. There's all kinds of cases in some parts of Asian islands where tourists are crazy enough to actually they'll let them off there for the day, and they find giant drag marks, and they've been dragged. They find these giant footprints and sort of dragged right back into the sort of islands forest, right? Because many of these islands have never been explored and weird stuff like that. So, and these monitor lizards can swim from island to island and things like that, right? So, another terrifying sort of thing out there in Australia that that also this megalania is quite the monster there. But anyway, so definitely. Australia is not something to sort of take lightly, and the same thing with the. It's a great place to visit. I'm not telling you not to visit. I would love to visit. It's beautiful, beautiful, and some of the Australian women are pretty smoking, and all that kind of stuff is going on, and a great lifestyle and beautiful sort of country and great cryptids. But there's some real dangers there, and besides deadly poisonous creatures and all kinds of stuff, people don't realize how remote some of this stuff is and how jungle-ish and everything else it is, right? So, I mean, even wading in a little stream that's only 10 feet wide could be the end of you, right? So, like, that sort of thing. So just keep that in mind. Don't go off the beaten path, right? Sort of thing like that. It's not worth it. Certainly make sure you're well prepared for sort of things and that sort of stuff before you do that. Others, the Billabong people still report seeing them from time to time. The old mighty mermaids are worldwide, and Aborigines even have them on cave walls, said to live in streams to rivers and ocean, and still reported. Not as many deaths blamed on them as in African rivers, which last episode was supposed to be included. I wanted to talk about this dam. These even sort of government officials refused to sort of make this dam keep going on this river, and now it's lost, but I forget the name of the river. But the because people were being sort of attacked by this sort of mermaid that would go there, right? And there's all kinds of rivers across there in Africa of sort of like mermaid accounts of people being dragged to their deaths and stuff like that, right? And the same thing sort of in sort of Australia, some of the accounts, but most of them don't seem to be sort of like as sort of like that sort of way. They just see them sort of floshing around in the river sort of thing, or out in some bay in the ocean or that sort of stuff, or jumping around or these kinds of things, but not that sort of like, not as much as them dragging you to their death sort of thing, right? But one account in 1880s of a miner seeing in a mountain lake a stunning blonde mermaid that sparkled of gold scales that sang to him. He decided not to get closer and ran away after hearing her unearthly singing. so maybe that was sort of a I wonder I wonder if she was related to Celine Dion there with sort of, I told you about there was a UFO that was having disturbances and hovering strange that was near a Celine Dion concert. And so one of the theories was that her voice was sort of causing sort of devastation to the UFO, right? So like maybe this guy, the same thing, like so whatever this early sort of a singer there might have been a bit out there with one of these big notes, right? Sort of stuff like that. But all kidding aside, it's interesting in the African ones, a lot of deaths are reported to it. But I mean, these could be crocodiles or all kinds of other weird things that may be causing these kinds of stuff, right? But I mean, it's interesting. And what I find most interesting of all is you have to wonder, how is it that they're on K-Bird and all kinds of stuff, and these zillions of references and people even capturing them and having them in museums and all kinds of weird stuff, there has to be some light basis to this of some sort, whatever the heck it really is, right? Like, I mean, it's absolutely a very strange sort of mysterious sort of one. I would say that definitely sort of makes you sort of wonder there what really sort of like is going on. Right? Like, I mean, absolutely bizarre. But I mean, the thing is that these accounts, like in modern times, and mermaids are pretty slim and sort of in these regions. But occasionally out at sea or the ocean, you'll get a story or stuff. But I haven't heard too many in Australian rivers of recent any times. But definitely in Africa they continue, and in many other places, even Canada occasionally, and other places, even the United States, once in a while, sort of stuff like that. There was the Erie chomper sort of blood creature, Black Lagoon man, all kinds of different ones, right? So, but there's been quite a few over the ages, but I still say that there's got to be something to this sort of mermaid sort of phenomenon. I, the George's stories and the crazy stuff and these ancient spears and so many strange sort of exactly the same in every country, planet in the planet, with the same kind of nutty tales. There's got to be some reason to this, that something out there looks like this a little bit somehow, like a couple of kinds, right? Like, sort of thing. There's got to be some. I mean, when you go to early explorers, the guys, each one, and they always say the same thing. Yeah, these, you know, Sarins or this or that, whatever they're calling them in the local language of the particular country. They're always saying the same thing. Yeah, it lives in this river or this place, and they got the upper body of a human, and the girls are pretty or ugly sometimes or stuff like that, and they got like only it's the same. Like it's too weird. I mean, it's just, why would sort of like, I mean, it makes no sort of logical sense that every single time somebody made this up. It's just, it's not feasible mathematical wise even. Like, if you ask any mathematician, yeah, you know what I mean, the odds of a million people all making up the same lie, like, I mean, it's very, you know, it's not feasible. So there's got to be some basis to these things, sort of to a certain degree, like whatever they may be. Again, I do believe that dugongs could be the answer sometimes, or manatees or seals or different things, and in some of the accounts you can clearly tell that that's what they're actually describing. But then other ones are too weird. I mean, even these fish people that can actually crawl onto the land and start becoming a normal human being again. There's a lot of these too. Like, I mean, there's some extremely strange. There's something to this that I have no answer for. All I can tell you is I just don't believe it's full imagination. There's got to be some little basis to it of some sort. But if you think any of them are sort of wild, even just as scary as a crocodile, in fact, even more so in some ways, is what's coming up next here. These possibly extinct and odd giant wormish with legs to mermaid of a large-sized creature was said to inhabit the Murray River in Lake Alexandrina. It's strange, like some of the accounts made it sort of like more mermaidish, but then other ones it made it like look like this giant wormish sort of leech monster with sort of legs on it. Right? So, like, I mean, pretty strange. There was several variants of these sort of stories. One story of a boat captain and his crew being attacked by a giant hands that grabbed the side of the boat. So you can see from down here is coming up there and sort of grabbing at the sort of thing. They called it the Mudjawonk. I don't even know how to pronounce it. I'm not even going to try that one. And elders today mostly agree that it's extinct. So this is interesting. You notice how they always sort of in earlier accounts, these sort of like a lot of people would, oh, we're talking to the silly natives and their imagination and this kinds of stuff like that. but here you have a group that's even telling you, and I find these in many accounts that they say, oh no, we don't see them anymore, but they used to live like a few hundred years ago or stuff like that, and it's still passed down. But now they're not seeing it, and so you can't say that they hallucinated it like all the time when sort of like there's a lot of things to this that it makes much more common sense that these were just strange unknown animals at the time, whatever species they might have been, and that because the marshes dry out or these different things, and sort of now they go extinct, right? Well, they're even telling you this, and I have these worldwide where the monster used to be in the lake and he's there no more, right? That sort of thing like that. But all of them are sort of creepy, but I mean, this is even much more creepy. The John Ness monsters. So in Queensland to Brisbane and all kinds of other places, quite a few types of pythons, when people have been going to the can, will be sitting down in there, and the family will turn around, and all of a sudden the sort of John Ness monster is there coming out. There was a case in England of a giant one that lasted for actually months and months. He kept swimming around in different people's toilets and would come up and visit you and say hi for a minute and then go down again. And it took them for ages to actually catch him. But there's been other strange stories of other things from all kinds of sort of other weird ones, from pygmy possums to worm-like monsters coming out of the toilets and stuff like that. In fact, the pygmy possum, which was this thought to be extinct for a zillion years, yeah, you know, one of their outrageous amounts that they proclaim, but it was actually discovered in the 70s, and it had something to do. This guy had to go to sort of the John up in some kind of weird sort of higher sort of altitude place in some kind of cabin like thing, and this pygmy possum was sort of holed up in there, and that's how it was discovered, right? So absolutely sort of fascinating. So even a toilet, you can discover sort of new cryptozoological creatures. And here's another one. This terrifying, even though this isn't in Australia, there's been similar reports of giant leech-like monsters and mega titan-sized worms and all these kinds of stuff. And there is some very large leeches that are known there, and large sort of night crawlers. But this sort of this particular one here isn't any sort of known species, and this is terrifying. This guy's going for the John, and he turns around, and all of a sudden this giant leech monster comes out. Look at the size of this thing, and it starts wiggling on the floor, and these insane people, instead of actually calling scientific community or anything like this, they decided to grab it and keep it alive, and somehow they captured it and then dragged it out and dropped it in a local river and let him swim away. That's amazing. I mean, so I mean, me right away, I would have been terrified of it, but I would have tried to hold it off with a stick or something, and then immediately tried to get some scientific group over here. But mind you, I told you about the time trying to get these scientists to come look at this unidentified weasel species, and the same thing happened. No, yeah, kid, you're seeing a mole, right? Sort of stuff like this, right? So, I mean, this might have, this guy probably was better off doing that, because he might still be sitting there waiting for them to come by, but very terrifying sort of a creature there. So, if the Australian outback is terrifying enough for you, just even be careful of the jaws, this sort of stuff like that, and watch out for these giant hands that could be out there, right? So anyways, the Australian one was a lot shorter. I mean, there's most of the other cryptids are more sort of, you can't really conclude them as like full water like sort of stuff like that, and even partial of these aren't really cryptids, but they're just, I wanted to put in some sort of bigger scary fish and these kinds of stuff, and weird sort of that sort of thing, and just to give you an idea that even small water systems and stuff, like you always hear these scientists, oh wow, could the monster exist and whatever. This crocodile lives for decades up in some stream, little river and stuff like this, and this dude's like 20 feet long, and you know what I mean, he's certainly able to eat, and he lives in a little stream. So I mean, the same thing could apply. You don't know how these sort of things would come up. Maybe they do, as they say, a lot of these Russian lakes where they'll have cattle or something sitting by the shore, and all of a sudden the monster comes out of the side of the lake and grabs them and yanks them in, right? So, I mean, they may sort of fortify their sort of food there, like if what's her name there? What's Mrs. Wheaties there? If she was the Kardashians there, if Kate Jenner there was sort of out there, right? That sort of thing, right? So, but I mean, all kidding aside, though, is seriously, it's the thing is that they could grab any sort of, like, when you're along this sort of, like, the any sort of animal or even a human or anything. These creatures may have a slow digestion sort of thing. They may only need to eat like a snake every so often, or who knows, right? So the lake monster eats fish normally, but once in a while to sustain his diet, even he grabs a deer by the shore, these other crazy stuff. So it could be the same sort of thing would apply, right? Like sort of that sort of idea like that. So definitely, if you sort of are fortified up there with Wheaties, don't be standing by the river or this giant leech monster might get you, come out and get you, sort of stuff like that. But all kidding aside, though, seriously, it's pretty terrifying. Anyways, so whatever this cryptid was there's been similar reports in Australia, so that's why I put it in. Plus, he just literally gives me the creeps. I mean, could you imagine you're sitting on the john and you turn around and this 6-foot sort of leech monster comes out of this sort of can at you? Like, I mean, wow. So absolutely terrifying. So, but anyways, this was a shorter presentation, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the ones out there, and I'll pick another countries there coming up, and more sort of strange ones and some more killer eel monsters to all kinds of different other ones out there. But anyways, the Australian continent, certainly the place to check out. I would love to hook a giant great white shark on a rod reel. I'd be terrified, but at the same time, it's something I would love to do. I would certainly let him go, and I wouldn't want to harm him too much, so I would sort of like use a smaller sort of thing and just hope for the best. As long as I can get him near the sort of boat and get a photo, it's good to go. I'm certainly not going to be handling them. I handled a shark, another one that I landed off of a beach in Fort Lauderdale. It was like this 5.5-foot lemon shark. And I mean, these insane people, the second I dragged up on the shore, I wanted to let it go. These crazies came from all over the place, and some of them couldn't speak English. I don't know what language even that they were. It might have been some kind of Cuban-like language, possibly, or one of those. They all started running around and sort of leaping with these bats and stuff, and they started beating on the fish right away. And I said, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And I said, "No, I want to let go." No, we want like this, and they're screaming. So I kept a couple of the shark's teeth from it. I said, "Well, listen, man," I said, "at least you killed my fish here," sort of thing like that. And I didn't want to argue with him, and I mean, it's Florida, right? And the next thing, one of them's going to pull you out a gun on you. So, I mean, it wasn't worth sort of. I've had some strange luck with that over the ages. A mug for a muskie to a shark, this sort of stuff. But I mean, these kinds of things were a lot of places like I fish were in heavy sort of areas where a lot of these kinds of people are around, and people get excited with giant fish, right, and sort of stuff like that, and they want to eat them. Some of them, some of them don't speak English or other sorts of things. So once in a while, you'll run into something a bit weird, But I mean, so just keep that in mind. I mean, seriously, there's a lot of strange things out there, and even though there wasn't like too many super mysterious cryptids in this one sort of thing like that, there certainly is some sort of a validity to these sort of things here, where at least, especially in the past, I believe that probably there might have been something actually to this bunyip, but it might have been something very different than what it is today, right? And sort of thing like that. And I think the Bunyip in the last year 100 years has really been more of a sort of seal, the walruses that occasionally swim up at the river. But the original thing seems very different, and killing people and all this kinds of stuff, much more accounts of that. It seems different. So, but anyways, we know one thing: this giant leech monster is out there. So, guard your can there if you're in any of these wild countries there, because you never know what's going to come leaping out of the bush. So, anyways, well, if you got any sightings here, stay tuned for another show there, and definitely sort of contact there, and absolutely worldwide. I know I get viewers from all over the sort of place. I don't get 5 million viewers, but I do get them from a lot of different sort of locations and different sort of things like that. So, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed just another sort of episode of these worldwide of lake monster sort of stuff, right? And I'll do plenty more there. There's way more to talk about, where there's way more sightings and way more sort of stuff, and a lot of suspects of what they could be and different things like that. But some of these really are that it's hard to make a monster sort of a show out of sort of repeating 10 sort of sightings, right, or whatever, right, that sort of thing. So anyways, stay tuned for next show, and hope you have a pleasant day, and bye for now.